She wasn't supposed to open the vault. She wasn't even supposed to be in the room. But as the thunder rolled across Madison Avenue, the maid's daughter reached for money, and the billionaire pretending to sleep finally saw something he couldn't buy: conscience. Hours earlier, that vault hadn't been open. Hours earlier, Charles Prescott hadn't been a man waiting for truth. He'd been a man convinced the world owed him nothing but lies. But when the rain started pounding against the windows of his 32nd floor Manhattan office, that night, his test began. Now, through half-closed eyes, he watched. Lily Mendez stood at the edge of his desk, her small hands trembling as she held 3 thick bundles of $100 bills. The vault behind her glowed like an open wound in the dark office. Lightning split the sky, casting her shadow long and jagged across the floor. Charles waited for it. The pocket, the bag, the desperate shove into a backpack. But she didn't run. Instead, she placed the money carefully on his desk. 1 stack, then another, then the third. Her fingers lingered on the bills for just a moment, not out of greed, but something else. Hesitation. Sadness, maybe. Then she stepped back. Mom says too much money makes people forget what matters. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of that office, it cut through him like glass. Charles's eyes snapped open. Lily gasped, stumbling backward. The color drained from her face. He sat up slowly, his gaze cold and unreadable. "You're not taking it?" She shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "It's not mine. Everyone takes what's not theirs." His voice was sharp, clinical. "Everyone. Not my mom." Her chin lifted slightly, even as her hands shook. "Not me?" The door burst open. Maria rushed in, her cleaning cart clattering behind her. Her eyes went wide. Vault open, money on the desk, her daughter standing in the center of it all. "Lily!" She pulled her daughter behind her, breathless, terrified. "Mr. Prescott, I'm so sorry. She didn't mean to." "Get out." Maria froze. Charles stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over both of them. "Take your daughter. Leave. Now." "Please, sir, I need this job." "I said leave." Maria's face crumpled. She grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her toward the door, whispering frantic apologies as they disappeared into the hallway. The sound of their footsteps echoed, then faded. Charles stood alone in the silence. The rain drummed against the glass. The vault light hummed. And for the first time in 20 years, he felt something he hadn't felt since he was young. Unease. He walked to his desk and stared down at the neatly stacked bills. Untouched. Returned. Not out of fear, but principle. His hand hovered over them, then pulled back. He sat down heavily in his chair, the leather groaning beneath him. Outside, the city glittered, indifferent and endless. Inside, something small and quiet had cracked open, and he didn't know what to do with it. Sometimes the smallest act of honesty shakes the tallest tower of pride. If stories that test the heart make you pause and think, subscribe. It means you still believe truth can change people. Midnight came and went. Charles was still at his desk. The rain had softened to a whisper against the glass, but the silence inside his office felt louder than thunder. He'd sent his driver home hours ago, told his assistant not to call. He needed to be alone. Except he wasn't alone. Mom says too much money makes people forget what matters. The words looped his mind like a song he couldn't turn off. He'd tried pouring himself scotch, tried reading contracts, tried standing at the window and letting the city lights drown out the noise in his head. Nothing worked. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, but all he saw were faces. Marcus Delaney, his first business partner. Charles had bought him out for pennies when the market crashed, then turned the company into an empire. Marcus died broke 3 years later. Patricia Glenn, a whistleblower who'd come to him with evidence of fraud in his supply chain. He'd buried the report and had her quietly removed from every industry board she sat on. The shareholders, the employees, the vendors he'd squeezed until they bled. He told himself it was business, strategy, survival. But tonight, under the hum of that vault light, it felt like something else. His hand reached for the bottom drawer of his desk. He hesitated, then pulled it open. Inside, beneath folders and old pens, was a photograph in a cheap plastic frame, a family portrait. His ex-wife, Rebecca, his son, Daniel, 12 years old in the photo, smiling wide with a gap in his teeth. His daughter, Sophie, barely 6, holding a stuffed rabbit. He hadn't seen them in 8 years. Not since Rebecca told him he'd become a man made of money and ice. Not since Daniel stopped returning his calls. Not since Sophie sent back his birthday checks unopened. Charles set the frame on his desk and stared at it. The edges were dusty. The faces frozen in a time when he still believed love was worth more than leverage. He looked away. The vault glowed in the corner like a sentinel. Its light spilled across the floor, pale and unrelenting. He'd always kept it open when he worked late. A reminder of what he'd built. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like it was watching him, judging him. "It's not mine." Lily's voice again. Small, certain. Charles rubbed his face with both hands. His chest felt tight, his throat dry. He thought about Maria's terrified eyes, the way she'd pulled her daughter close, ready to take the blame for something that wasn't even a crime, the way they'd left without argument, without defense. They hadn't fought him. They just believed he was right to send them away. And maybe that was the worst part. Charles reached for his phone, typed Maria's name into the employee directory. His thumb hovered over the call button. Then he set it down. Tomorrow. He'd call her tomorrow. Tonight. He just sat in the glow of his vault, surrounded by everything he'd ever wanted, and feeling emptier than he'd ever been. Morning broke over Manhattan like a promise. The storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the windows of Charles's office, turning the glass towers across the street into pillars of gold. The streets below hummed with life. Taxis honking, coffee carts rattling, a city that never remembered yesterday's rain. But Charles remembered. He stood at his desk, hands clasped behind his back, watching the door. His assistant had called Maria an hour ago with a single message. "Mr. Prescott, request your presence. Bring your daughter." No explanation, no apology, just a summons. Now they stood before him. Maria's hands twisted the strap of her purse. Her eyes were red-rimmed, sleepless. Lily stood close to her mother's side, small and still, her gaze fixed on the floor. Charles studied them. The fear, the confusion, the quiet resignation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver key, set it on the desk between them. "This opens my vault," he said. Maria's breath caught. "Mr. Prescott, I don't understand." "Not you." His eyes shifted to Lily. Her. The little girl looked up, startled. Charles leaned forward, his voice even and deliberate. "I want you to go to that vault. Open it, and do whatever you think is right." Lily's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Sir, please." Maria started. "I'm not speaking to you." Charles straightened, his expression unreadable. "Lily, the key is yours. 10 minutes. Do what you believe you should do." He turned and walked toward the door. "Mr. Prescott, wait." Maria's voice cracked with panic, but he didn't stop. The door clicked shut behind him, and his footsteps echoed down the hallway until they faded into silence. The office felt enormous. Maria grabbed Lily's shoulders, spinning her around. "Don't touch anything. Do you hear me? Not the key, not the vault, nothing." But he said, "I don't care what he said." Maria's voice trembled. "This is a trick, Mija, a test, and if you fail, we lose everything." Lily looked at the key gleaming on the desk, then at the vault, its steel door slightly ajar, shadows and light spilling from within. "What if it's not a trick?" she whispered. "It's always a trick." Maria pulled her close, tears streaming down her face. "People like him don't give. They take. They test you so they can prove you're just like everyone else." The clock on the wall ticked. 1 minute. 2. 5. Lily stood frozen between her mother's fear and the pull of something she couldn't name. Her small fingers twitched at her sides. 7 minutes. Maria paced, whispering prayers under her breath. 8 minutes. Lily took a step toward the desk. "Lily, no." She picked up the key, walked to the vault, slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, deliberate click. And in that exact moment, footsteps. Charles Prescott's footsteps. Coming back down the hall. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Lily stood at the open vault, frozen. The door swung wide. Charles stepped into his office. Maria stood rigid, hands covering her mouth. Lily remained at the vault, small and still, the silver key dangling from her fingers. His eyes moved from the open vault to the girl, then to the money inside, stacks and stacks of it, perfectly untouched. No one spoke. He walked slowly across the room, his footsteps deliberate. When he reached the vault, he looked inside. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, except for one thing, a piece of paper, notebook paper, slightly crumpled, resting on top of the nearest stack of bills. Charles picked it up. The handwriting was careful, shaky in places, the kind that came from a child trying her best to write neatly. If you don't need this, maybe help my school. The roof leaks when it rains. He read it once, twice. His jaw tightened. Then he saw what was beneath the note, a photograph. Old, faded, the corners bent with age. He lifted it slowly, his hand trembling. The image stared back at him like a ghost. A younger Charles Prescott, 30 years younger, sharp-suited, grinning wide, shaking hands with a man in a factory uniform. The man's smile was warm, proud. His name tag read Mendez. Behind them, a banner. Prescott Manufacturing, 10 years of excellence. Charles's breath left him. No, he whispered. His mind spiraled backward. 1987, the Bridgeport factory. An equipment failure. Faulty wiring in the stamping press. Miguel Mendez, third shift, 42 years old. A wife, a daughter. The accident crushed his legs, ended his career. Charles had been younger then, hungrier. The company lawyers settled fast. A check, an NDA, a quiet exit. Miguel never worked again. Charles had signed the papers himself, moved on, built his empire, and forgot. But Miguel hadn't forgotten him. Charles looked up at Maria, seeing her clearly for the first time, the shape of her father's eyes, the set of her jaw, the quiet dignity Miguel had carried even after everything. Your father, Charles said, his voice hoarse. Miguel Mendez. Maria's face crumpled. She nodded, tears spilling over. He passed 6 years ago. Charles felt something crack inside his chest. Miguel had raised this woman who worked 3 jobs to keep her daughter fed, this woman who cleaned his floors without complaint, this woman whose father he'd paid off and erased, and her daughter, this 8-year-old girl who could have taken anything, had asked him to fix a leaking school roof instead. The note trembled in his hand. Lily's voice, small and uncertain, broke the silence. Did I do something wrong? Charles couldn't answer. He stared at the photograph, at the man whose hand he'd shaken while cameras flashed and speeches were made about loyalty and family and values. He'd given Miguel money. Miguel had given him kindness. And Charles had forgotten which one mattered. He sank into his chair, the weight of 30 years pressing down on him like stone. The vault glowed behind him, full of everything he'd built on the backs of people like Miguel Mendez. People who deserved better. People who gave more than they ever took. Maria stepped forward, her voice breaking. We should go. No. Charles looked up, his eyes red. Stay. For the first time in decades, Charles Prescott felt something other than control. He felt shame. If you've ever wondered whether kindness survives in a world built on greed, tell me your thought. Maybe the answer is still waiting in stories like this one. Charles didn't sleep that night either. But this time, it wasn't guilt keeping him awake. It was purpose. He sat at his desk with a laptop, and decades of employment records spread before him. Miguel Mendez's file was thin. A few performance reviews, the accident report, the settlement agreement. At the bottom, a forwarding address in Bridgeport, the same address Maria had listed on her employment application. He cross-referenced tax records, school enrollments, hospital bills. The picture came together slowly, painfully. Miguel never worked again after the accident. Disability payments barely covered rent. Maria had dropped out of college at 19 to care for him. 3 jobs. No health insurance. Lily's father wasn't in the picture, just a name on a birth certificate. Gone before she turned 2. Charles leaned back, the weight of it settling over him. He'd paid Miguel $60,000 in 1987, enough to make the lawyers comfortable, enough to make the headlines go away, not enough to rebuild a life. And while Miguel struggled, Charles had built an empire worth $900 million. The math was obscene, but this wasn't about math anymore. He pulled up his private banking portal and stared at the screen. For 30 years, he'd moved money like chess pieces, calculated, cold, strategic. Every dollar had a purpose. Every investment had a return. This would be different. He typed carefully, Roosevelt Elementary School, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Searched their public filings. Found the maintenance requests. The budget shortfalls. The leaking roof that had been deferred for 3 consecutive years. He authorized a transfer. $500,000. Anonymous. Routed through a trust his lawyers would set up by morning. Enough to fix the roof. Renovate the library. Update the playground. Fund supplies for the next decade. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Next, he opened a blank document and began drafting. His fingers moved faster now, the words coming easier than they had in years. The Mendez Family Scholarship Fund. For children of working families in Bridgeport. Full tuition. No applications. No committees. Just need. He'd fund it himself. $10 million to start. More if necessary. Not because the press would praise him. They'd never know. Not because it would ease his conscience. It wouldn't. But because Miguel Mendez had shaken his hand 30 years ago and smiled like Charles was someone worth believing in. And Maria had raised a daughter who saw a vault full of money and asked for a school roof instead. They'd given him something he didn't deserve. Now he'd spend the rest of his life trying to earn it. Charles saved the document and closed his laptop. The office was quiet except for the hum of the city below. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out Lily's note, the paper soft from being handled so many times. If you don't need this, maybe help my school. The roof leaks when it rains. He traced the shaky handwriting with his thumb. She reminded me who I used to be, he whispered to the empty room. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the skyline, and for the first time in 30 years, Charles Prescott felt like he was building something that mattered. 6 weeks later, Charles Prescott walked through the doors of Roosevelt Elementary, wearing jeans and a faded Columbia sweatshirt. No one recognized him. The principal knew him only as Mr. Charles, a retired professional who'd answered their volunteer posting. No press, no fanfare, just a man with time and a background check that came back clean. We're grateful for any help, Principal Hayes had said, shaking his hand. Most of our volunteers are parents. We don't get many, people like you. Charles had smiled. I'm just here to help. Now he sat cross-legged on the floor of the 3rd grade classroom, surrounded by 8-year-olds building towers out of recycled cardboard. The new roof hummed quietly overhead. No leaks, no buckets, no water stains spreading across ceiling tiles. A small hand tugged his sleeve. Mr. Charles, can you help me? Mine keeps falling. He turned. Lily Mendez looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. She didn't recognize him. Why would she? The last time she'd seen him, he'd been a man in a suit behind a massive desk, cold and untouchable. Now, he was just another adult sitting on a classroom floor. Let's see, he said softly, examining her wobbly tower. What if we reinforce the base? Like this. She watched carefully as he folded the cardboard, her tongue poking out in concentration. When the tower stood firm, she beamed. You're good at this. I used to build things, he said, a long time ago. What kind of things? Big things. Buildings. Companies. He paused. But nothing as important as this. She tilted her head, considering. My mom says the best things are the ones that help people. Charles felt something catch in his throat. Your mom sounds very wise. She is. Lily sat back, her hands covered in glue and glitter. I want to be like her when I grow up. Or maybe a teacher. Or an inventor. I haven't decided yet. You could be all three, Charles said. Really? Why not? He smiled, a real smile, the kind he'd forgotten he could make. The world needs people who build and teach and care all at once. She nodded seriously, as if he'd just shared a great secret. Then she reached for a piece of construction paper and began drawing with a crayon. Quick, confident strokes. Around them, the classroom buzzed with life. Children laughing, glue bottles squirting, the teacher calling out encouragement. Charles sat in the middle of it all, listening. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't offer advice unless asked, didn't try to control or direct or manage. He just listened to their dreams, their jokes, their small, perfect observations about the world. For 30 years, he filled every silence with his own voice, his own plans, his own certainty. Now, surrounded by children who knew nothing of boardrooms or profit margins, he learned what it meant to simply be present. Lily finished her drawing and held it up, a sun, bright yellow, with rays reaching to all four corners of the page. Below it, in careful letters, "The world is better when people share." She handed it to him. "For you, Mr. Charles, because you helped me." He took the picture with trembling hands. And for the second time in 2 months, an 8-year-old girl reminded him what it meant to be human. 2 years passed like water through open hands. Charles continued volunteering at Roosevelt Elementary every Thursday. Watched Lily grow taller, brighter, more curious about the world. He never told her who he was, never needed to, but his body had other plans. The cough started small, a tickle he ignored. Then came the weight loss, the fatigue, the doctor's visits that turned into tests, then scans, then the words no one wants to hear. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months, maybe less. Charles took the news the way he'd taken every deal in his life. Calmly, clearly, without argument. He didn't fight it, didn't rage, didn't seek second opinions or experimental treatments. He simply prepared. His lawyers arrived at his penthouse on a gray October morning with documents an inch thick. He signed them all without hesitation, his handwriting still sharp despite the tremor in his fingers. The entire Prescott fortune, $900 million, would go into the Lily Mendez Trust for Education and Community Welfare, managed by a board, distributed to schools, scholarships, working families. No buildings would bear his name. No plaques. No monuments. Just help. Quiet and endless. "Are you certain, Mr. Prescott?" his lead attorney asked. "Your son, your daughter, are wealthy in their own right," Charles said, "and wouldn't want this anyway." He tried reaching out to them one last time. Daniel had listened politely, then said he needed time. Sophie hadn't answered at all. Charles understood. Some debts couldn't be repaid. Some distances couldn't be closed. But maybe, just maybe, this could mean something to someone. That night, he sat at his desk for the last time. The vault stood open behind him, empty now except for memories. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write, the words coming slowly, deliberately. She passed the test. And so did I. His hand cramped. He set the pen down and stared out at Manhattan. The city glowed beneath him. Millions of lives, millions of stories, all burning bright against the dark. He'd spent so many years trying to rise above it all, to conquer, to win. He'd forgotten he was part of it. Charles closed his eyes and felt something he hadn't felt since he was young. Before the deals, before the money, before the empire. Peace. Not the peace of victory. Not the peace of control. The peace of finally letting go. He thought of Miguel Mendez, of Maria's tired smile, of Lily's drawing still taped to his refrigerator, a sun with rays reaching everywhere. The world is better when people share. She'd been right all along. Charles picked up the pen one more time, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. The pen slipped, rolled across the desk, came to rest near the edge. His breathing slowed. The city lights blurred. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the silence that followed, Charles Prescott, ruthless billionaire, forgotten father, redeemed man, simply stopped. The pen lay still in his open hand. The note waited on the desk, and the vault for the first time in 30 years, stood empty and at peace. The headline broke 3 days after Charles Prescott's death. Manhattan billionaire leaves entire fortune to child who changed his life. By noon, reporters swarmed the Bridgeport apartment building where Maria and Lily lived. Cameras, microphones, questions shouted from the sidewalk. Maria stood in her doorway, pale and trembling, holding the letter from Charles's attorney. She'd read it 5 times and still couldn't believe the words. The Lily Mendez Trust, $900 million. For education, for families, for children who deserve more than the world had given them. Mrs. Mendez, how does it feel? Did you know Mr. Prescott personally? What will you do with the money? She closed the door and locked it, her back pressed against the wood. Lily sat on the couch, eyes wide, clutching the letter her mother had tried to explain. Mom, I don't understand. Maria knelt in front of her daughter, tears streaming down her face. You were kind to him, Mija, when you didn't have to be, when no one else was. But I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. Maria pulled her close. You reminded him what mattered. Across the city, investigators entered Charles Prescott's office for the final inventory. They cataloged the furniture, the art, the shelves of first edition books. Then they opened the vault, empty, except for a single piece of paper, centered perfectly on the steel floor. The lead investigator picked it up, read it twice, then radioed his supervisor. She passed the test. And so did I. The note made the evening news. Then the morning papers. Then the documentaries that would follow for years. But the real story was quieter. Roosevelt Elementary got a new science lab, a library filled with books, and a music program that brought instruments to children who'd never held one. Other schools across Bridgeport followed. Roofs repaired, playgrounds rebuilt. Teachers finally paid what they deserved. Scholarships went out by the hundreds. Kids who thought college was a dream reserved for other people suddenly had futures they could touch. And Lily Mendez grew up watching it all unfold. She never forgot the man in the faded sweatshirt who'd sat on the classroom floor and helped her build a tower, who'd listened when no one else did, who'd told her she could be a teacher, an inventor, and someone who cared, all at once. By the time she graduated high school, valedictorian, full scholarship to MIT, she'd chosen her path. She'd become all 3 years later. When reporters asked her about Charles Prescott, she'd smile and pull out a folded piece of notebook paper from her wallet. Her own handwriting, faded but still clear. If you don't need this, maybe help my school. He didn't just give us money, she'd say. He gave us proof that people can change. That kindness echoes. That one small choice can reshape the world. Because in the end, Charles Prescott learned what his empire never taught him. Real wealth isn't measured in what you keep. It's measured in the hearts you change, the lives you lift, the light you leave behind when you're gone. And somewhere, in a classroom in Bridgeport, in a scholarship letter opened by shaking hands, in a child who dared to dream because someone believed they could, his legacy still burns bright. If this story touched you, maybe it's because deep down you believe second chances are real. Subscribe and tell where in the world you're watching from, and let the next story remind you why compassion still matters.